Now I'm gonna show you guys how to render a basic sphere. This is one of the first things I've learned. If you can render a matte sphere, if you can understand how basic lighting works, you could render anything. This is the foundations. Let's create a light source and a cast shadow real quick. And again, this is a matte surface, so it's not reflective. So what's going to happen is where the light plane meets the dark plane, you're going to get a core shadow. And cast shadow, of course, is the shadow that's on the surface that is casted from the sphere. The light, if we're looking at indoor light, usually there will be a fall off in the cast shadow, meaning the further away the cast shadow is from the object, the softer it will be. So I'm softening the shadows that are furthest away from the sphere. And at the very bottom of the sphere, or on the opposite side of the lit side, we have bounce light. So there's light hitting the surface. Say this is on a white table. All the light is bouncing off of the white table back onto the shadow side, and that is the bounce light. There is an area right underneath the ball where no light can reach. That is called ambient occlusion. It's basically where the light just can't reach. And often you will get a lost edge there. So the shadow on the sphere is called a form shadow. Form shadows show the roundness of an object, or how fast the object turns as it goes away from the light. Cast shadows are usually hard. Okay, here's the light direction on a matte surface ball. Let's put some labels on here. That part, the darkest part of the shadow, is called the core shadow. Core shadows are soft. Then this part is called reflected light or bounce light. And you have a highlight, of course. That's the part that is closest to the light source. So we're not doing reflective surfaces yet. And then you have the cast shadow, usually hard edged. Closer to the object is a harder edge. Further away is softer. If you're drawing this with a pencil, you could use a blending stump to create that soft edge. The bad thing about using your finger to smear it is that you get the oil on the paper, and if you make a mistake, it would be very hard to correct it. And lastly, in this little area where no light can get to, this area is called ambient occlusion. It's usually crevices or places where the light just can't reach. Think indentations and deep crevices. So there are a couple of different light sources. We're going to look at direct lighting. There's two types of direct lighting. There's parallel light, which is sunlight or a really strong light from far away. Sometimes people call it natural light. And then there's radial, which is usually artificial light. Artificial lights are man-made, and you get conical shapes and cast shadows usually have a fall off, as opposed to parallel light. Parallel light, you just get a hard edge cast shadow. So remember, cast shadows have hard edges and form shadows have soft edges. Artificial light has noticeable fall off. You're a lot more likely to see soft edges with artificial light because the strength is nowhere as strong as the sunlight would be. Sunlight, however, is very intense, and you're more likely to get hard edges without the fall off. So the other type of light is ambient. Ambient lighting is light on a cloudy day or from a softbox. It's filtered light. Cast shadows would have very soft edges. And the other aspect of having ambient light is your tonal value isn't as extreme. It's not as it's less contrasty. The light areas would not be very light and the dark areas would not be as dark. Everything is kind of mid-tone and very soft looking. So let's say we have a colored object on a ground that also has color. Actually, this is a pretty good work method, is to paint the values in grays and then do color washes on top with whichever medium you're using. We're gonna be using watercolor, but you could do this with acrylic. You could do it with oil. It would work the same way. In fact, a lot of the old paintings were built up in this way. So with color, you always want to think about temperature. And if you have a cool light, then you will have warm shadows. And the opposite is also true. When you have warm lights, you'll have cool shadows. There are always exceptions, but this is generally how it works. Now, if your ground plane is orange and your object is blue, some of that orange is going to show up in the reflected light. And a common mistake about reflected light is sometimes people have a tendency to make the reflected light too light. And that's a mistake, because the reflected light in the shadow side should still be darker than the darkest parts in the light area. Meaning it shouldn't be, because it's a matte surface, it shouldn't be as bright as any area of the light side. And you're gonna get the color of the surface bounced into your object, of course. But it will be very subtle. Your object won't completely turn a bright orange. So now that we learned how to construct the head, We've learned how to see where the planes of the head is, how the head turns, or where each plane ends, and we've learned how to render. We're going to learn how to draw the actual features by isolating them one part at a time so we can focus on the details of each feature. A great source for reference for these types of studies is looking at drawings from an artist named John Vanderpoel. In his book, The Human Figure, you'll see a lot of isolations. This is a very classical way of studying. Some of it appears in the Loomis book. Some people, a lot of art students also study from gigantic plastic casts of features also. So they would just set up a light and practice drawing from the cast. But here I am looking at John Vanderpoel. I'll share the handouts with you guys so you guys could try a couple features. Definitely try the eyes because that's the most important feature. And we're going to apply the same ideas that were applied. We're going to use the same ideas from the rendering video that you just saw. We're going to think about where the shapes are and where does the top of the eyelid end, what's the position of the eyebrows and the pupil, the iris, the highlight, and we're gonna map it out. Then we're just gonna render. Like, where's the cast shadow? Where's the light source? What is the soft edge and what is the hard edge? Where's the cast shadow? Where's the form shadow? And we're gonna look at where's the darkest darks and where's the lightest lights. A nice way to design the highlight in the eye is kind of like a wedge shape, but generally the highlight is the shape of the light. So when it's a little wedge like this, it reminds me of those fluorescent lights, workshop lights. It's just a nice contrast against the circular shape of the pupil. And for the study, or normally anyways, your light source is on top. You're gonna get a core shadow. I'm just making flat shapes for now, and then I'll go back in and work on the edges a little bit later. But this is generally where the cast shadow is. It's flat right now. And we're gonna render eyelashes. So you'll see that the highlight is on the right side of the pupil. So this left side here, the eye is kind of like a cone that goes inwards. So usually when the highlight is on the top right, that means the top or the bottom left would be a little bit brighter than the bottom or the right side, because that's the side that's facing the light source, since it's a cone that goes inwards. So when you render this, the right side is going to be a little darker, and then the left side would catch the light more. Like that. And I treat the eyebrow as a shape initially. I don't draw every hair. These are always fun to do. You could get your eraser and do this to it. I'm just showing you digitally so my hand is out of the way. But I used to do these studies with charcoal on newsprint. Actually, this is the first time I'm doing it digitally. I've never done it digitally before. I've never really rendered much digitally. It's always good practice to draw a pair of eyes. That way you're forced to draw like a relationship between the two. So I'll demonstrate that right now. So this is pretty much the same deal. I'm just rendering a pair of eyes using the eraser and the smear tool to draw eyelashes. And I'll move on to a nose. So use what you learn in the rendering video to do one page of feature isolations. Great pieces of references are old Hollywood photographs from the 20s and 30s. Those black and white photographs are great. They have really nice sharpness and uh, crisp edges. Usually you can find great photos from that time. And let's move on to lips. So for the lips, usually when the lighting is on top, the upper lip is usually darker than the bottom lip. The center portion is a little bit lower than the middle, and then the sides drop down even further down. And I treat the center kind of like a sphere, so it's like a core shadow. If you're using digital medium, I like to use a soft brush but with texture. Just makes it look a little bit more like charcoal than using a perfectly smooth round brush or something, or airbrush. Try to make your marks really neat. It's very easy to get sloppy rendering, and you don't want that. Okay, and lastly, let's do a couple ears. Here's one from the front view. You're probably gonna draw that many times. There's a funny Y shape in the center of the ear. And for the back of the ear, you have like a S shape for the outside rim, and the inside part is kind of like a bowl. And remember, the ear attaches at a slight angle, so there's the S curve.